I was sliding into 2C, deadheading home after a 3-day run, when the woman who tried to have my pecan tree cut down marched onto the jetway and demanded my seat. By the time we landed, she'd be in handcuffs on that same metal bridge, eyeliner smudged, still sure rules were for other people. But at the gate, all I saw was Darlene Pike, our HOA president at Sycamore Ridge Estates, posing as a concerned citizen with a laminated smile and a voice trained to needle. "Sir," she told the gate agent, "I have a medical need for 2A, and he chin-flick at me, won't survive coach with that red polo and those shoes. Put him anywhere." Rosa, the agent, didn't flinch. "Ms. Pike, your boarding pass says 3B. If you need accommodation, we can discuss it, but we won't bump another passenger." "I'm not another passenger," Darlene said, switching to her stage whisper. "I'm the reason our community functions." I kept my mouth shut because pilots are taught that still water shows the clearest reflection. Also, this wasn't my flight. I was just trying to get home to my wife, June, and a reheated casserole. But when Darlene's phone buzzed and she glanced down at her screen, then at me clocked something off. The look wasn't just annoyance. It was calculation. The kind a person gets when the dominoes they lined up are about to fall, and they think they can make one small push. The man behind her brushed past a junior flight attendant setting a tote near the forward galley. He was slick in the way of a downtown escrow office, charcoal suit too sharp, hair shellacked to a point, heavy signet ring that felt like a brand. The flight attendant tested notice, but I've spent 20 years watching hands on checklists, hands on throttles, hands reaching for what they shouldn't. That ring flashed once under the fluorescent, then disappeared into the churn of boarding. We pushed from the gate into a jelly gray afternoon. The weather wasn't terrible, just the kind of wrinkled sky that makes the seatbelt sign come on a little sooner than people want. I shot June a text, "On board. Be home by 9. 3 dots appeared, then her reply. "Heads up, HOA emergency vote at 8:30. Darlene's pushing a variance to let Ridgeview Development double the townhomes by the creek. They need quorum. Supposedly you'll miss the vote." My chest went cold. And here was Darlene, arranged like a queen in 3B, already rehearsing persecution for the camera pointed discreetly at her aisle. We climbed through a thin layer. Engines hummed, trays clicked, the soft electrical thrum that says you're a long way from gravel and grass laid down easy. I told myself I was being paranoid. People see conspiracies in the clouds. But the ring, the tote, the last-minute vote, those weren't clouds. They were breadcrumbs. 15 minutes into cruise, the first bump tossed a few heads. Tess steadied herself, rolled the cart back toward the galley, and that's when I heard the wrong click. Overhead bin latches have a sound the way a Zippo lighter does. You just know it when you've lived with it. This was a sharp, pinched snap from the bin above where Tess had stowed her tote. It wasn't the latch closing, not exactly. It was like something inside had settled into place. My neck prickled. Across the aisle, Darlene started her performance. There it was, a stack of filings, an appeal and stick address label they'd forgotten to replace on one envelope. The arrogance of amateur criminals is they think they invented noon. Another bump. The seatbelt sign pinged, a small brass halo. Monique's voice came soft over the PA, just a whisper of desert gravel at the edges. "Folks, we've hit a line of weather. Please stay seated. We'll be through it soon." The cabin absorbed it like a pew hears a hymn. Backs softened, shoulders settled. Except Darlene, who widened her eyes for the invisible audience. "There's something in that bag," she announced, pointing in the general direction of Tess's tote. I saw a man near it. He looked foreign. The last word dangled like bait. I stood just enough to catch Monique's eye and tipped my chin toward the bin. No urgency, no theatrics. She nodded minutely, peeled Tess off the aisle, and the two of them did what professionals do. They assessed quiet, they moved deliberate, they shielded panic with honey. The air marshal who you never noticed until you shifted one row forward, draping a magazine over his lap like a curtain. Monique opened the bin with hands that looked slower than they were, slid the tote toward the aisle, and set it on the jump seat. She didn't unzip it. She looked at the seams. She looked for pressure, for stretch, for a story told in fabric. Her fingertip brushed something under the lining. The air around us changed a shade. She didn't say device. She didn't say anything at all. She snapped her gaze to the marshal and gave the smallest nod. He rose, drifted like a cloud caught a breeze, and took the tote into the forward galley where there's a designated place you move suspect items away from people, toward the least risk corner of a pressurized tube with wings. Darlene, sensing her scene slipping, doubled down. If you aren't diverting, then I'll insist on a report. I know people. She looked right at me and smiled the way a cat does when it knocks a glass off the counter. And I understood the plan plain as runway lights. Cause a disruption, force a diversion, clog my night until 8:30 becomes 9:10 and the vote goes through with a snick of perfunctory hands. I did the one thing I had. I sent June everything I knew: the ring, the tote, the timing, and told her to call Sam, our neighbor who lives 2 doors down and runs a small investigative podcast. Sam's not the type to let go once he bites down. Within minutes, June pinged me. Sam pulled Ridgeview's lead counsel's calendar entry. Monitors 7,242 arrival. Contingency at Jet Bridge. Who writes like a Bond villain? Another pocket of chop. The service cart, mid-galley, rolled 3 inches, the brake notched but not hard. I shot a foot out without thinking and blocked it with the corner of my roller bag before it clipped an ankle. The man in 4A woke sputtering and then, realizing he wasn't dying, went back to sleep. The marshal returned to the jump seat and murmured to Monique, who cut the cabin lights by 1 notch and turned her smile up by 2. The captain up front swung us west, pointed at smoother air, and briefed approach for Home Sequoia Regional, a place that smells like Jet A and pine bark after rain. Descent is always the point where a story decides if it's going to hurry or breathe. We breathed. Monique worked row by row, collected cups like confessions, and made eye contact the way you light a candle in a storm. Darlene kept filming under the pretense of documenting negligence, her narration full of invented diagnoses and vague threats. She caught me in the corner of her screen and smiled again. Some people think the rules apply to everyone else. I thought of our creek, the one that swells brown after rain if the drain near Maple doesn't get cleared. I thought of that pecan tree and the kids who sell lemonade under it every July. Power is never abstract. It's roots and water and shade. We touched down without drama. Reverse thrust spoke in its low throat. Brakes whispered. A ripple of relief moved through the cabin like a quiet wave. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and every phone lit up with a galaxy of welcome home pings. The door cracked open to damp air and a slice of evening. That's when Victor Hale, the ring man, stood from 2D2 fast, swung his briefcase down, and half-jogged toward the forward galley for the jet bridge door as if urgency itself would grant him clearance. Monique stepped to block. He pivoted, showed a flick of metal, small, thin, not dramatic, but sharp enough to matter. I was already up, roller bag in my right hand. You don't plan these things. You do them because your bones remember what matters. Victor reached past Monique's arm, angling for the exit keypad, and I drove the hard plastic corner of my bag into his wrist. The knife clinked. The marshal was there in 2 strides, twisting Victor's elbow down and to the left, the movement efficient as a checklist. He barked, hands, and Victor gave him everything, including a stream of inventive curses about how this would all be smoothed out by morning. Darlene stood in the doorway, phone half raised, mouth half open, caught between filming and fleeing. Airport police took the handoff at the threshold, rain beating on their jackets. One officer looked at the tote now sealed in a hard case and said something into his shoulder mic I couldn't hear over the blood in my ears. Darlene tried to push through. I have a meeting, she sputtered. This is a terrible misunderstanding. Ma'am, the marshal said without malice, you're part of it. They cuffed Victor. They guided Darlene back onto the aircraft. Not rough, just firm the way you talk to a horse that wants to bolt. The jet bridge echoed like a hallway in an empty school. Out on the tarmac, blue and red flashed against the damp metal. People started to realize this wasn't a TikTok skit. It was Tuesday night, and their world had tilted an inch and tilted back. My phone went off in my pocket. June again, we have quorum. Sam posted everything: corporate ties, timestamps, the calendar entry. The clubhouse is packed. People are mad, but they're clear. 10 minutes later, vote failed by a mile. They also motioned to remove Darlene pending investigation. It's done. I don't often let myself feel a victory while there are still forms to fill out and statements to give, but I let that one settle behind my ribs like a warming stone. Monique caught my eye, gave me a tired smile, and said, "You play hockey, or was that a lucky hit with the suitcase?" "Pick up on Sundays," I said. "Mostly I try not to run into people." She laughed, low and genuine. The cabin applauded itself. Whoever started it will never know they started it, and then fell into the hush that follows adrenaline. When you count your fingers and thank your shoes for staying tied. I stayed back while they deplaned, traded info with the officers, gave my statement to the Marshal Clayton. First name I never caught, who had the quiet authority of someone who seemed just enough stupidity to respect it. Darlene, still insisting this was harassment, tried one last threadbare trick. Do you know who I am? Clayton nodded. That's why this is happening the correct way. She glared at me like I'd trespassed on her porch. You made this worse for yourself. I thought about responding. Something pithy about creek beds and pecan roots. Instead I said, Darlene, you brought a match into a dry field and then got mad at the wind. Her lips tightened. You'll regret crossing me. I regretted it already, I said gently, because there's a kind of mercy in clarity. When you knocked on my door with a tape measure and a lie. Tonight just made the paperwork easier. They walked her down the bridge, the phone finally dangling at her side, recording nothing but the rhythm of her steps. Outside, the air smelled like wet aluminum and the ferny bite of jet fuel. Rain made constellations in the puddles. By the time I reached the rideshare curb, my phone was full of neighbors' voices. Sam's podcast episode had gone live mid-meeting, a special drop with receipts. People I barely knew were texting thanks like I'd stacked sandbags by myself. I hadn't. The truth is I nudged where the line led me. Rosa holding the line. Monique reading a bag like an old book. Tess doing her job with her whole spine. Clayton catching a wrist at the right angle. June connecting the filings. Sam lighting it up so nobody could pretend they hadn't seen. Community is just a long chain of small brave decisions made by people who keep showing up. Back home, much later than I wanted, I walked the edge of our yard with a flashlight and the dog huffing at my heel. The creek murmured its muddy song. The field behind us would stay a field one more season, and maybe next year's lemonade would taste the same as last year's. I want to tell you, I slept like a stone after that. I didn't. The thing about seeing someone weaponize systems you're supposed to trust is it sandpapers your faith down to what's solid. Most of it still is. Enough of it is that when the wind changes, you can hold your ground without wishing for a storm. A few days later, a certified letter showed up from the HOA's interim board with the kind of apology that tries hard not to be an admission. Darlene had stepped aside. Victor, it turned out, did contract work for Ridgeview's security vendor. The toad had contained a nasty little RF toy that, if I'm reading the report right, was meant to jam cabin Wi-Fi and sow confusion, just enough to make a diversion feel practical. It's amazing, the petty limits of what powerful people try when they think everyone else is late or tired or not paying attention. Sometimes all it takes is one wrong click in a quiet cabin to remind you exactly how awake you are. Here's what I know now in my bones. The fight over a creek, a tree, a field, isn't small just because it fits inside a property line. But the real ending is quieter than that. It's a field staying a field. It's a creek doing what creeks do.